Hi, I'm Judith Dreyer. Thank you for joining me for this podcast series At the Garden's Gate presents The Holistic Nature of Us. My intent is to take us, you and I, into a better understanding of the concepts behind our holistic nature and how that ties directly to the holistic nature of the world around us. How can we connect the dots in practical ways that we are nature and nature's in us? I will be featuring authors and educators, practitioners, and others whose passion for this earth helps us create bridges. We'll see what's trending, what's relevant to our world today, not just for land use, but to connect the dots between ourselves and nature. It's time for practical action and profound inner change so our natural world is valued once again. Today, I am so delighted to introduce you to Linda Wiggen Kraft. Linda is a garden designer, a garden writer, an artist, a creativity teacher, and meditation teacher. Her work centers around enhancing body, mind, heart, and soul through art and gardens. She is based in St. Louis, Missouri. Her writing and gardens have been featured locally and nationally. She teaches workshops around the country. Hi, Linda. Welcome to the Holistic Nature of Us podcast series. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for asking me to be part of this. It sounds like a wonderful thing you're doing to share this knowledge with so many.
Well, I hope so. That's my intent. Linda, we have so much to talk about. You have such a beautiful background. For the folks who are listening, she has a beautiful website. Her mandala flower art is just gorgeous, not to mention what she does with gardens, which is one of the reasons we're talking today. Now, she has an interest in feng shui, but it's more than that. And so I'd like Linda to tell us about your interest in gardening and the use of feng shui and other methods to create garden spaces.
Well, I think I was fortunate, unlike many children today, in that I grew up in a time when children could spend time outside, and I spent many summers in the woods in various outdoor places at my grandparents' dairy farm in southern Wisconsin. And I think that's where my initial love of nature began. My mother also was an avid gardener at a time before it was that popular, and I think I learned from her and many of my relatives. It's interesting, I often use that quote, if you want to make God laugh, tell him or her your plans, because I had no plans to ever be working with the land. Mm-hmm. My professional experience is a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree and an MBA. And so my family moved in 91 to St. Louis, Missouri from Minneapolis, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven because of the climate. In fact, it may not be ideal, but from Minneapolis, where you have about 3 months of non-freezing, it did seem like heaven. And so I had been a meditator for very long, and I had taught meditation, and I started designing gardens with a neighbor. This is over 25 years ago, or about 25 years ago. And what happened was I started to notice with my clients, my neighbor didn't stay with the business only for a few years, that there was this really profound shift in people's lives when they were able to know their garden, love their garden, be in their garden. And I think because of my background in meditation, interest in things that were more holistic or spiritual, I started to really realize that there was something so profound by people being outside in their own gardens that I started to write about it. And I've been a writer, a garden writer, since about the time I started. And I really bring a holistic perspective to my writing and my work. And I tell people when I write, I don't write how-to articles. I write why articles. What's the big picture of what it is that draws us to nature, that's so much a part of who we are. And also at that time, this was like I said, 25 years ago, I became very sick from the normal chemicals used in gardening. So I became an organic gardener, and this is pre-internet. I had to find out ways to bring products and methodologies to the Midwest that weren't common, if at all, used in the St. Louis area. So this is another part of my work and a part of my teachings, is how to do things holistically, organically, sustainably. Mm-hmm. And what I found is I did develop what I call a process, the complete creative process, when I work with clients, in that I want to make that inner landscape of a person match the outer landscape. And so I actually do little guided meditations with people to help them find maybe that ideal inner landscape of an ideal place or setting that really, I think we all carry that with us. And the way I came up with this was I was with my son's fifth grade class a while ago. And I had these little kids. They had actually a science project. They had to design a garden where they were doing like a bird's eye view. They had to use graph paper. They had to find out about plants and all that. But I started out by asking them, I said, there's so many plants. There's so many ideas of what kind of ideal landscape there should be. It's really hard to make those choices. I said, but I bet inside of you already, there maybe is this ideal landscape, this ideal garden. And so I sat down and I had them do this guided meditation where we went through just allowing them to close their eyes. And I didn't call it a meditation. This was a public school. And I just said it was a little imagination experience. And I had them close their eyes and just think about the most wonderful place they could be in nature, where they felt safe and where they could be doing anything. And I just had them go through each of their senses. What are you experiencing? What are you smelling? What are you seeing? What are you tasting? And so on. And that took about 10 minutes. And then I had them each take a piece of paper and draw or say what they were experiencing. And I still have these written pieces of paper. They're some of my most valued treasures. Like, these children of 10 years old described usually very specifically what they were doing, where it was, if they were maybe in their grandparents' backyard or in a mountain or near a meadow or in a jungle. Like, one little girl said, I was in a jungle and it was so quiet. I could just feel the peace. And, just these beautiful things. And I think we all have that. And one little boy, it was my favorite. He was a hockey player, and he goes, his place was in a jungle, but it happened to have a hockey rink.
That's funny.
I said, and the best part is every time I play, I always win. And so anyway, so when I go through this process with helping people find that inner landscape to match an outer landscape, I think we do have that ideal setting for us and what we want to be doing. And there's also a balance that we perhaps want and need in our life, so that maybe we do need a quiet sanctuary where we can be off by ourselves because our life is so busy. But for other people, maybe they want to have their landscape be a place of family get-togethers or friends getting together. So those are two very different kinds of settings that would be created based on their own inner landscape and their own needs, and how to have a more holistic and balanced life. Also, I think that when we are in our gardens or in nature, we experience life more fully than when we are inside. And that's that, when you think about it, what are the most beautiful smells? Well, those are the ones we find outside, the woods or the flowers. What is the most beautiful beauty? The flowers and the parts of nature. The touch of a lamb's ear, or even grass on our bare feet, or the rough of a bark. I mean, these are things we don't experience when we're inside. And there's such a healing quality to experience through all of our senses. And I often say there's 6 senses when we're outside, because we have that sense of space. We have that sense of movement with the sky over our head and the earth beneath us that we don't experience as much when we're inside. And go ahead.
No, those are beautiful reminders about engaging our senses, number one, just when we are outside. But I love the fact that you take your clients on sort of an inner journey so that they can connect with, but also honor that which makes us feel a part of something greater than us, a part of the peacefulness out there, the soft breezes, and like you said, the earth beneath our feet. And the dot I'd like to connect with you, Linda, based on all that you just shared, is when you work with land, though, you're giving something to the land, aren't you, in order to create that garden?
Well, I think that there's a communication, or I should say, no, there's a communication between the land, the plants, the nature, the wind, the sky, and the person who opens up to that and knows that and loves that. And I've seen it many times. I had a couple clients initially when I first started, and one was the most loving person, and another was much more uptight, to put it mildly. Mm-hmm. And in the garden where this woman was so loving, even my children, I would often take my children with me when they were young, when I first started doing this, and often there were swimming pools, and they got to swim when I was working on the garden right by the pool. Uh-huh. And even my children, or my mother, went to this one garden, and they said, like, why are the flowers so bright here? Or, I mean, it wasn't just my interpretation of it. Other people could feel it and sense it. And so the land does respond to how we approach it and how we love it. And, there are other things too with looking at the land and working with it. So what is there can be worked with in an honoring way to make changes if we are going to be making changes. And it's a listening that sometimes, again, you and I talked a little bit about having a sitting spot or a sitting place in a garden, that what is so important for all of us is to spend the time just being in a garden space. And if, as you mentioned, your elders often talk about 20 minutes of just sitting in a sit spot. And so when I start working with the garden, there are times when I have to think of a design. I go in and I'm supposed to be doing something, just a small consultation. But ideally what I like to, and that's fine, I can do a quick design, but ideally what I like to do is just walk the land and see it and know it and feel it. And things, it's like planting seeds of what might be best for that piece of land. And so, and that takes time. There's this sort of germination process and just this imagination or daydreaming. And again, I remember talking to some kindergartens once about what I did. And I said, you know what? Do your parents or people get mad at you when you get dirty? Like you come home and your clothes are dirty, and they're like, oh yeah. They shook their heads, yes. And I said, sometimes do those same people say, quit daydreaming? Do this or do that, when you kind of look like you're just sitting there thinking and imagining? And again, they went, yeah, yes. And I said, you know what? I do that for a living, and I get paid. I work in the dirt and I get dirty, and I love it. And,
what a great way to get a point across to kids that it's okay. It's okay to daydream. It's okay to play in the dirt.
Right.
And, that's interesting, because I came across an article that they actually have named the component in soil that actually works on our brain chemistry and creates serenity and more peacefulness, and it's called geosmin. Is actually the scientific name for the component in the soil that does that. So I think it's funny that not funny, but I think we have to remind ourselves that nature's there for us.
Yes.
It's part of who we are too. And we're very similar to nature. We have the four elements are in our body. Our bodies are water. They're made of solid structure, which is the earth. We need air to breathe. You know, we have a fire in our cells that creates energy, that gives us movement, gives us, it's part of our life force. And we forget to kind of tie that in to our use of nature. So I love your experiences here, and it sounds like you have quite a few. And the fact that you get your clients to actually take a few minutes and daydream with you with guided imagery, I think is the link. See, that to me is a bridge between your work and what they want. They have to go to the inner place.
Yes.
What is your favorite? Do you have a favorite garden that you've developed for somebody over the years?
There's actually two I'd like to mention. I did design a garden for an elementary school. It was a preschool elementary. I think it was preschool and maybe first and second grade, kindergarten first. I can't remember exactly. But I called it the Garden of Wonder because what was so beautiful about this design was that we were able to, and that what ended up being actually built was a little different, but there were actually areas of the garden that worked with the five senses and also the sense of movement. And like I say, it didn't turn out exactly like this. One of the planned things was for a labyrinth, to have children be able to walk a labyrinth so that they could have that quieting down of walking and that type of meditation. But what I loved was it would bring the children into not only the contact with nature, but make them aware of their senses and how to enhance those through being outdoors. And there was water for the touch, the sense of touch. There was an area for sight, and of course all of it's sight, and these are all intersecting, but with some plastic panels that would be like stained glass windows where the sun would shine through and have those colors. And so it was really a very exciting thing to do, to design that for children, because one of my loves of my work is at times getting to work with children. In fact, in my son's elementary school, when they were there, I worked with some other parents and teachers, and we set up a vegetable garden project. It actually got written up in Organic Gardening, where I think, how many kids were there? I would say 200, 400. I can't even remember. That's terrible. But each classroom had their own plot, and each child had a square foot, and they could plant these vegetable seeds that they would harvest before summer. But my other garden that I wanted to mention was not really a garden per se. It was more of a temporary experience. There's a place in North Carolina. It's a 1,400-acre retreat center, Episcopal retreat center called Cayuga. And there's a conference there called FACE, Faith, Art, and Creative Expression. And a couple of years, and I'm going again this coming August, but a couple of years ago, the 5-day course I taught was called Creating Sacred Space in the Garden, Planting Prayers. And we didn't create a garden per se, but what I had all of the participants do was find a spot within the landscape there. There's lots of woods. I mean, it's a beautiful place in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And then they would create, just for those 5 days, this sacred space spot. And we literally either planted prayers that we wrote into those areas, or again, we use the 4 elements. We could, they could be planted in the soil. They could be burned to have that energy go into the air. They could float them. We use natural materials so that it wouldn't be toxic. Float them there's a pond there. And I'm forgetting one. Anyway, there are various ways that they could put the energy of what they were working on and creating into this land and create this heart space, sacred space that was very, very special for them during that time. And these were just beautiful experiences. That was very.
Oh, I can imagine, especially for both. We need it just as much as the children, don't we?
Yes, exactly.
To be playful, mindful, and use our imagination. And guided imagery is that bridge. It uses our imagination, and we can put something out into the world. And part of my intent for these podcasts is to have people understand that we can do something very practically in the here and now. It's not just reading a book about, with the 20 steps of doing an organic garden, which is overwhelming to me, and I'm a master gardener, but it's taking something that speaks to us and put it in very practical ways. And I think you've given us a couple of examples of that. But before we get into more practical tips, what does your partnership mean to you with nature?
Well, I think it's just something that is evolving, and I want it to be deeper than it is, and it's always deepening, but just to be aware and honoring of the beingness of all of nature, big picture and individual pictures, like a tree. Like you mentioned, your elders talk about brother fox or brother tree, or sister moon. That was actually something I think St. Francis used. But it's just this, like I say, honoring and knowing and being able to feel this heart connection and whole body connection with nature, to feel that energy, because there is that energy that we haven't yet identified by science, but yet is part of many, many cultures, many people's experience. So I just try to be very honoring and even when I'm just digging in the ground and planting seeds, I always want to sort of just stop for a moment and thank the land, the soil, the seeds, the plant that's going to be growing. So it's just that honoring, being grateful, being aware with whole body.
I agree with you. And again, that's what my native elders would teach too, is to be present. And that's true of many Eastern traditions. I think one of the hardest things I had to learn in creating my sit spot was to accept just being there in nature without expectation. So I can tell you I probably sat 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening for years, and I still try to do that today. And it doesn't mean a golden eagle is going to drop in front of my lap. You know what I'm saying? But it's the acceptance of being with that rhythm of nature, because nature's rhythm doesn't stop for us. So if I get busy, the flowers are going to bloom, the leaves are going to grow, and they're going to die before I even get out there, So there's a lesson that they teach us about the cycles and rhythm of nature is the same, that we have cycles and rhythms within our nature. And if we supersede them, so to speak, by being so busy that we don't watch our gardens grow and bloom, we really are missing out. In the world of herbalism, for example, if I'm too busy and I don't get out there when that flower is ready to bloom, I miss an opportunity to get that flower at its peak nourishment, blossoming time that provides me with the best nutrition. So I love what you're saying about getting our whole being involved with being out there and maybe slowing ourselves down a little bit so that we can appreciate it. And it doesn't matter if it's 20 minutes or 2 hours out in a garden. What matters is that mindfulness of being out in the garden. Well, what I'd love to do is I always like to end with 1 to 3 practical tips for our listeners, something that they can apply today from your work in your field.
Well, we mentioned the sit spot. I think every garden should have a place where you can sit, just a chair or a bench or a stump of a tree, something like that you can spend time being comfortable and just allowing nature to come to you. If you do sit quietly, you'll notice that more birds or more whatever, you'll notice more. And so that is really important, because we often don't allow ourselves to do that. The other thing, I think, I live in an urban environment, is for us to realize how important our gardens are, our land is, as an arc to our declining populations of insects, of birds, of wildlife that we need to be part of this world. And I was telling Judith that there was a study here in St. Louis by St. Louis University about native bees. And what was found by looking at community gardens and even some abandoned areas where, quote, weeds just grew, there were many more species of native bees than in rural areas not that far away. And that what is really important for us is to be that place where the insects can live, where the birds can live, where the wildlife can live. Now, fortunately, I don't have deer where I live. I'm too much in the city. But, these smaller things, especially the birds and whatever, possums I have, which I love. Anyway, just this realization that our gardens are necessary and important for us to maintain the monarchs, the insects. And it doesn't have to always be native plants, but I like to work with those mainly because they are in partnership with the insects that have grown up with them over the eons. So, for example, like monarchs, for example, need milkweed plants. So planting those is very, very important because monarchs can only survive on milkweed plants. And that's one thing to consider, the butterflies and the insects. And the birds need the insects. So what if there's a little bit of chewing on some of your leaves? If you really look at it carefully, maybe you find out that's a leafcutter bee, and they're just chewing a little bit. They're not going to destroy your plant, but they need that to take to their nest so that those bees can survive. So I think educating yourself also. And regarding that sit spot, I think what's very important is also to open yourself to the love that's you can receive and give to your garden, nature. Just sitting there doing a quiet meditation with your eyes closed or open, where you just literally feel that warmth, that lovingness, that energy go out from your heart area and surround yourself and go out into the land, into the soil, into the sky, into the trees, the plants, the animals that may be living there, and just allow yourself to know that you have a sacred space in your garden. I'll just say one more thing about garden. Here in the West, we look at gardens and our way of our language is that they're usually these quarantined areas. Well, here's my lawn, there's my garden over there. In Japan and in England, the whole piece of property, the lawn, the driveway, whatever, that is their definition. So of garden. So I have a friend from England. She told me if somebody called a house and said, can I speak to so-and-so? And that person was out mowing the lawn, for example, the answer would be they're in the garden. And we don't think it. We think we're always we don't step into our garden much, So I think just think of that whole space that you are responsible for is sacred space. It is garden. It's an ark that the whole of nature needs, and we can be the caretaker of that.
Oh, I agree. That's a beautiful way to put it, too. And I get people in my walk, in the events that I go to and places where I teach, that often say to me, well, they're in an apartment or a condo and they only have a deck. And I know that there's some physical parcels in those kinds of complexes where there's no sun. If your deck faces the north, you're going to have a very difficult time growing a tomato plant, for example.
Okay.
There's some plants that you can use in those lower light environments, but that's the kind of research you might have to do to see what goes there. Do you have any suggestion?
Well, there's always good old hosta.
Yeah.
Which does well, and they do flower, and the bees come to the flowers. If you let the hosta flower, the stem with the flowers bloom, I have seen bees and maybe butterflies or hummingbirds, I can't remember, but those flowers are very important. There are ferns. Usually you can, a still bee And, depending on the climate, those are perennials, but they should be able to survive if it's not zone 2, I guess. I don't know. You do have to be a little more knowledgeable of how pots will freeze more in the winter if you do leave them out. Mm-hmm. And there are flowers too. Impatiens, although some of the impatiens now have a disease that it's hard to work with common impatiens. So I think I particularly like independent garden centers. If somebody can go and ask what is available that can be put in a pot at those places. And just as a practical thing, there are some pesticides that are very, very damaging to the insect life and the bird life because of it. And in particular, there are some called neonicotinoids, which they're sometimes called neonics for short. But you can ask at your garden center if they have been planted with that, because those are very damaging. It's a chemical that goes into every part of the plant and lives for several years. And anyway, there's a controversy.
Yeah, there is. But they destroy the life of the insects. And so then if the insect population goes down, there's not going to be anything for the birds, and then the bird population goes down. So for my listeners, Doug Tallamy's book, Bringing Nature Home, addresses these issues very, very well, because we want our landscapes to be more sustainable. And I like the fact that you're in an urban area, and you shared with us that study that shows that urban areas aren't as lacking as we might assume for some of our insects and species. Yes, you don't have deer that walk through, but I'm sure there's a mouse or two, or a vole or two, or a groundhog or two in the neighborhood, and they eat certain things in the soil, and the grubs and bugs and that kind of thing, and so far all up the chain of command, so to speak. So sustainability is what we're looking for with all of these ideas. And my feeling is when we have a more personal connection with nature, we have a more personal vested interest in nature. And then the next step can be looking for sustainability and promoting more sustainability in our own backyards. And that includes people who live in an apartment or a condo that has a deck. They can put some stuff on their deck. Pots are great on decks. The only issue that some of them may have is light. If you face the north, you may not be able to grow much of anything. And so you have to do, maybe get involved with your community garden if you really want something, which is another alternative. Well, Linda, this has been really fascinating. I just want to sort of summarize your 2 tips for today: a place to sit and to value the land by being with the land and creating those bridges. So those are wonderful for my listeners today. Did you have anything else you wanted to add? No, I just think there is so much beauty and love and making us more whole outside in nature in our gardens that we just need more gardeners. And gardens need more flowers and plants, and just get out there and be there and work with it and enjoy it and love it. I agree. To me, that's where the relationship is between us and nature. That's where the holism is when we understand that we're a part of it, not a dominating force over it. And I think that's been our mindset, and that's slowly changing one garden at a time.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you for joining Linda and I at The Holistic Nature of Us. And I really hope you feel as inspired as I do by Linda's talk and her very practical advice. This is Judith Dreyer, author of At the Garden's Gate book and blog. For more information, go to my website, judithdreyer.com. You will find information for this podcast. The transcript of podcast is also available, as well as by book, blog, and class schedules. And also, Linda, could you give everybody your website, please, and contact information?
Yes, I have one website. It has 2 easy-to-remember words, though. They're 2 different domain names, but they go to the same site. One is all words together, no spaces, gardensforthesoul.com. And the other is creativityforthesoul.com. So people can find that. I have a blog. They can access that through those websites.
Great. And you also offer classes, and you do some online classes, correct? The artwork, folks, is beautiful. I hope you really check Linda's site out. Thank you, Linda. So I want to end with a quote from Paul Hawken. He's an environmentalist and an author who reminds us that sustainability, ensuring the future life on Earth, is an infinite game, the endless expression on behalf of all. So with those words, we say goodbye and enjoy your day. Thank you.
Goodbye.